Oh, hey Chris, come over here. Check out this tower of power.
Damn! And a perfect pair to match.
Oh yeah. Go ahead and touch them if you like.
I can barely fit my hands around them.
That's what the last guy said. He looked me straight in my eyes as he was feeling them up, said he'd never seen anything like it.
I can't believe what I'm hearing right now. You guys are disgusting. Oh, you guys are talking about the case fans. Oh, sorry. Continue.
Did she think we were talking about the case?
The new H500P from Cooler Master sports a pair of 200mm RGB fans, generous radiator support, and phenomenal cable management packed in a unique industrial exterior. Click the link in the description to learn more. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. Today I'm taking a closer look at September's PC of the month, which is the portable AMD gaming system featuring a Ryzen 5 CPU and RX Vega 56 graphics card. Now, instead of testing the system here in the studio, I ended up taking it home because I was running short on time, and I did all my benchmarks there. But the only monitor that I had at home was the 3440 by 1440 curved ultrawide IPS display, the Acer Predator X34. So I did all of my benchmarks on that display, and while I could have dumbed down the resolution to more conventional 1080p and 1440p 16:9 resolutions, I thought I would switch things up today and just run 3440 by 1440 all the way. So hopefully that's cool with you guys, doing something a little bit different today. But nonetheless, we're still going to take a look at overall gaming performance as well as acoustics and thermals, which I'm almost more curious about inside of the Portal chassis here from good old Bitphoenix, because I've never worked with it before, and a lot of people were commenting in the comments saying that, you know, how does this thing get airflow? It looks like it's completely closed off. Are the thermals just complete shite? We're going to be taking a closer look at all that as well later today. Now, diving right in here, when Wifey Sauce initially built this system, it was with a Ryzen 5 1600. But since then, I've had to repurpose that chip for other things. It's the only 1600 I have on hand, so I've actually dropped in a 1600X to take its place, which is what I use to conduct all of today's benchmarks. Hopefully that's cool. The main differences that we're talking about here, going from a 1600 to a 1600X, is a higher TDP, going from 65 to 95 watts, so we might be introducing a tad more heat into the equation. And then additionally, you know, it's probably costing, what, $25 to $30 more right now, MSRP, for that X SKU. And then finally, you do get a bit more overclock ability. Of course, Silicon Lottery is a huge factor here, but you might be able to squeeze out 100 to 150 megahertz more out of your core frequency with an X part. Again, that's assuming that power and thermal conditions are all good. Now, that being said, I did manage an all-core overclock on our 1600X here to 3.85 gigahertz. I did attempt 3.9, and the system would crash every time. The screen would actually go black in the middle of gameplay until I dialed it back about 50 megahertz, and then it seemed perfectly fine. So 3.85 is what we got away with. That was with a stock V-Core, was not touching the voltage whatsoever. Ambient temperature in my room at home is much warmer than it is here in the studio, so please bear that in mind with these temperature results. It was about 80 degrees Fahrenheit at home. But with that said, the CPU temperatures were hovering in the 70s thereabouts, with a max package temp of 83 degrees Celsius. It's definitely not the greatest, but it is under TJ Maxx, and we were not seeing any sort of signs of throttling or stuttering or anything like that that might be caused from overheating. Now, in part one, a lot of you guys seemed curious as to how the CPU and motherboard in this case receive airflow, because it seems more or less closed off at the front here, but believe it or not, there's actually a 120mm fan pre-installed at the front of the case, more or less right in the middle, that's aimed straight at the CPU and motherboard, and we do have ventilation strips at the top and bottom of the case. There's tons of ventilation holes when you see it at first glance, but then you realize there's another layer of plastic underneath this mesh that has very few ventilation slots that kind of limits the amount of air that that single fan can really bring in, which is kind of a curious design move. I'm not sure why they didn't just leave it as open as it appears. If we had a bit more open ventilation at the front, I'm pretty sure we'd see the CPU temperatures fall a couple degrees. That's speculation, of course, but at the very least, this system, or this chassis, I should say, does support 120mm radiators, so if you wanted to throw an AIO on top of your CPU, you could do that and potentially drop the temps even further. But moving on here, allow me to refresh your memory as to which RAM kit we're running here. That's the Corsair Vengeance LPX 16GB kit, that's 2x8GB sticks, rated at 3000 megahertz. We got them running stably at 2933, close enough I say, and that was using Ryzen Master Funny thing about Ryzen Master, it kind of sucks. It's been super buggy for me. Throughout my testing, it was sort of a bane to work with. The way it works is you apply all your changes within the software while you're in the operating system, and then the system reboots in order for those changes to take effect. But more often than not, every time I would reboot, only some of those changes would have actually taken place. For example, the memory would be running just fine at 2933, but my overclock on the CPU was just not there. It did not apply for whatever reason, or vice versa. It took me about a dozen or so just random restarts, just rebooting the system, turning it off and on again, until finally both changes took effect, and I proceeded to run all my benchmarks quickly before something bad happened. At this point, I'm convinced that these are issues with the software and not the hardware that we're using. So AMD, if you're watching, perhaps look into this and see if there's anything you can do to make it run a bit smoother. But moving right along with our graphics card, we've got the RX Vega 56, which you can see peering through the top window of our case here. The Vega 56 is pretty much AMD's response to the GTX 1070 from NVIDIA, and it does compete fairly closely with that card. The one I have here today is the reference design, so we're talking an enclosed shroud, a blower style fan, can get kind of noisy, can get a little warm. Let's see how it did inside of the portal here. Well, actually under load, what I noticed at stock settings, this thing was ramping up to about 84 degrees Celsius. So at that point, I did not want to overclock it at all. It's a pretty fast card as is on its own out of the box. I'm leaving it at stock, and that's what I did for the rest of my testing. Now again, remember I was testing this in a fairly warm room, so your mileage is going to vary based on a number of different factors, including your own ambient temperatures, of course. That being said, there isn't much this case seems to be doing to help the GPU thermal situation. I mean, the graphics card's mounted in the sort of upper chamber of the case via PCIe riser card, which puts it apart from the CPU and motherboard, and it seems a bit starved for airflow in this area. I mean, there's a window right here, which is nice. You can see through it and see your graphics card, but it doesn't do squat for thermals, and you've got some ventilation from the front and the back, but like I mentioned before, there's a lot less ventilation going on through these holes than you might think. So overall, it seems to be a little hot pocket of air that with that single blower style fan face up, facing the window, it is quite starved for airflow. And this all sort of makes me think that perhaps an open air style shroud would perform better in this particular case, where you have more area around the graphics card for intaking fresh air, as opposed to just having that single blower style fan that's facing away from any sort of airflow that's taking place elsewhere in the case. Now, an unfortunate effect of having a hot running graphics card is that the fan tends to spin up a lot faster and make a lot more noise. Good news is that you can't really hear the graphics card fan, like at all. The bad news is that the only reason you can't hear it is because the power supply fan is so friggin' loud that it drowns out the sound of every other fan in the system, including the graphics card fan, the case fans, the Wraithspire fan. This FSP unit that I took a gamble on did not provide any worthy returns other than the fact that it powers the system and it hasn't blown up yet. It is so noisy that that little fan, whatever's in there, is making so much noise whether you're at load or idle. It makes the same constant loud ass whirring noise that pretty much ruins the entire experience of the system. I could understand if it was just ramping up to that level under load, because I could care less. I've already got my cans on, I'm listening to in-game sound, I could barely hear it anyway. But if it's that loud when I'm just browsing the web or something, it's a huge distraction, and it really puts a damper on the overall experience that I'm having so far. I guess the RX Vega 56 reference design card has finally met its match on an acoustic level. But I think we can talk about benchmarks. There's really not much to talk about. I did run 5 games, just some quick benchmarks to throw at you, using the latest Crimson driver at the time, which was 17.9.1, and these are of course all being run at 3440 by 1440 21:9 ultra-wide. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, here are your gaming benchmarks for the portable AMD gaming PC. All right, y'all, so those are the results. Overall, some pretty nice numbers from our Ryzen 5 and RX Vega 56 pairing. 4 out of the 5 games we were seeing well over 60 FPS on average, which is fantastic. And that's also great news for users who are on more common 16:9 resolutions, 1080p, 1440p. They're gonna be seeing even more performance at those pixel counts, which is great. PUBG was the only game, of course, that did not top 60 FPS. I think we got 45 FPS on average, 34 FPS with our 1% lows. Still very playable, no jitter, no stutter, anything like that. However, it is noticeably less smooth than our other titles. Of course, this is to be expected as PUBG is still in early access. It's not 100% optimized at this point. However, developer Bluehole recently released a patch that optimized the game for CPUs with more than 4 cores. So the performance scaling we're actually seeing going from 4 to 6 cores is massive. And you guys should check out Nathan's article from Legit Reviews. I'll put a link in the description below. Some fantastic findings there, very convincing and compelling. Makes you really want to upgrade to 6 cores if you haven't yet, especially if you're into PUBG. In our case, we're definitely taxing that 1600X, putting those extra cores and threads to use. However, I think we just need a little bit more GPU oomph to take on the game in its current state. To sum things up here, the system really does pack in some decent performance that allows it to game comfortably at 3440 by 1440. Where it really falls short is in the GPU thermals department. Of course, that might be able to be improved upon with a custom board variant, for example. We're not really going to know until we have one of those in. Additionally, the noise situation is just god-awful because of that power supply. If we were to swap that out for a quieter unit, I would imagine that noise emissions would be somewhat reasonable in this particular system. But that's all I got for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know what you think so far of these findings in the comments below, and don't forget to toss me a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Before you guys go, you can subscribe to my channel for more tech stuff coming at you really soon, and until next time, I will see y'all in the next video.